It's almost indescribable how it feels to be over enemy territory with injured crew members, airplane on fire, engine on fire, and the German fighters keep plowing through us and shooting us up.
When I walked in there, all I saw were bodies. Suddenly walked in there a boy and became a man in a matter of minutes.
The largest, most destructive international conflict in history nearly tore the planet apart. In 6 years, an estimated 75 million lives were lost in World War II, more than double the death toll of any other war humanity has ever undertaken. Yet, despite the American government's staunch political opposition to Hitler's Third Reich, the United States avoided active engagement for almost half of the war. It took a surprise attack from the sky on a date which will now forever live in infamy to rouse the American army. The United States may have had the largest, most capable army in the world at the time, but the young men who enlisted knew that this would not be a walk in the park. Many were leaving their homes for the first time in their lives, and each one knew it very well may have been his last. The invasion of the beaches of Normandy is most commonly remembered as a symbol of the American war effort and ultimate triumph. But what is less often recalled are the stories of the brave men who fought the war in the sky. For Air Force pilots, performing evasive maneuvers at 20,000 feet above the ground to avoid enemy fighters and anti-aircraft fire was par for the course. For the brave men in the 8th Air Force, battles were only one more thing to worry about. Every day was a matter of life and death, where the thought of never returning to their families was always present.
My name is Robert Barney. I'd like to mention I enlisted in the Army Air Corps in December 18th, 1940. I escaped twice from the Germans, but both of them on the march.
I flew 68 missions, 35 in P-38s and the other half in P-51s.
I was born and raised in Philadelphia in 1923. Went to local high schools and a year and a half in college.
I worked at Lockheed. I was a riveter, and I built the Hudson bomber. We were building these for the Brits on Lend-Lease.
Because President Roosevelt had brought out the rule that we had to sign up for the draft, so I thought I could enlist and get a better assignment, which I did.
I knew I wanted to fly because in Pasadena, the P-38s were flying over Pasadena occasionally, and I would see those because they were manufactured over in Burbank area.
I signed to the Army Air Corps and went to Jefferson Barracks, Missouri for a short period of time, and then went to Laurie Field to go through armament school, Air Force armament school, to learn about machine guns, etc. Then was transferred to the windward side of Hawaii at Bellows Field. I think it was September of 1941. And I flew as an aero gunner in an old observation aircraft as a tail gunner with a single 30 caliber machine gun.
When World War II started, America was determined to stay out of the conflict. The immense tragedies of World War I were still fresh in our memories, and with the Great Depression still taking a heavy toll on the domestic economy, engaging in the fight against Hitler was not a viable option for President Roosevelt. On December 7th, 1941, however, America was catapulted into action with a surprise attack from where it was least expected, Japan. The attack on Pearl Harbor decimated the Western Navy fleet, cost over 2,000 innocent lives, and left America with no choice but to retaliate.
We had a lot of commotion, noise, like explosions. We stood there and cried like babies as we looked at our Pacific fleet laying there like that.
I was at a movie theater in Boise, Idaho,
with my parents, and a trailer came across the screen that the Japanese have bombed Pearl Harbor.
And when the announcement came through, everybody was upset. They couldn't believe that the Japanese, who were supposedly in conversation with the diplomats, would attack us while at the same time talking with the our diplomatic corps.
I was stunned. Just amazing to have them attack us in this situation. And that day the losses were tremendous.
We were quite shocked more than anything else that it seemed to be such a surprise.
Our field, Bellows Field on the western side of the island, was not in Pearl Harbor, but we were strafed and had airplanes shot up on the ground. At that point, I had no idea what was happening. I just know we're getting shot up by someone. We didn't know whom. My squadron commander told me to get a shoot, and off we went looking for Japanese Zeros to shoot down, and luckily we didn't find one, because with my little 30 caliber machine gun, I don't think we did much damage.
I called the plant to see if there were any instructions for me. When they heard who I was, they said, "Harry, be ready to travel Monday morning." So we're going to move many of the airplanes here, the Hudson bombers, to Arizona, Higley Field.
We did miss the Japanese because they'd gone back to their ships, and so we went back and landed at Bellows Field, and we were so bewildered. We had no idea what had happened, who they were.
Everybody said, "Let's sign up. I'm gonna go here. I'm gonna go to the Navy. I'm gonna sign up tomorrow with the Air Force." And that was the sentiment on the bus on the way back to Philadelphia. Consequently, we all went back to school. People were dropping out of class and enlisting in the various services.
I think just about everyone knows the rest after Pearl Harbor, how things turned out.
I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
It didn't take much convincing from Roosevelt. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, brave young men from across the country were more than willing to join the cause. In fact, despite the protests from their parents, most were itching to take up arms against the Axis powers. Bound by ties of incredible patriotism, America's young men were determined to avenge their fallen comrades.
At the urgence of my parents, they wanted me to seek a deferment. Farmers could be deferred for farming was considered an important part of the war effort.
When I went down to enlist, the line was around the block. I mean, it took several hours just to get to the window. In April of 1942, that was about 4 or 5 months after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt lowered the age from 21 to 18 for flight training. And so I enlisted in 1942 to become an aviation cadet.
When I got back to the plant, I got very concerned about my hearing. So I went to the head of the department and I said, "I need to be in final assembly." And they said, "Harry, you're winning the war. We cannot lose you. I've given you a deferment. You'll have deferments till the end of the war if you'll just stay and build these planes." So I said, "Is that your final decision?" He said, "Yes." I said, "I quit." Now I'm subject to the draft.
A few months into that deferment, patriotism got the best of my farming experience, and I rode my Harley Davidson to Boise, Idaho, to the draft board, and I asked them how soon I could be on the road into the service. They said to be back here next Tuesday at such and such an hour, and I'd be on my way, and that was fast enough for me.
After a few more months, I decided I'd try to do something besides ride a 30 caliber machine gun, an 047, and I applied for flight training in the Air Force.
They didn't call me till November, and I went to Santa Ana at a classification center. And that's where you determine whether you're going to be a pilot, co-pilot, or a bombardier.
To me, was the best place to be would be a pilot in the Army Air Corps or the Navy, either one, because I had wanted to fly, and I like to fly, and I still fly a little bit these days.
I went to Lakeland, Florida for pre-flight school, and on to Greenwood, Mississippi for basic, and Stuttgart, Arkansas for advanced flying school, and at that time got my second lieutenant's commission.
And there's where they create an ego. You must have an ego to be a soldier and be a pilot. You got to think that you can meet the enemy and beat him. By the time you get a leather jacket and a silk scarf, you're starting to walk with a swagger. And it's so important of who you are.
I became a tail gunner at age 19. From Amarillo, Texas, I went to Kingman, Arizona for gunnery training, learned how to all the mechanics of a 50 caliber machine gun. Spent about a couple of months there, and then from Kingman, Arizona, I went to Avon Park, Florida, where I met my crew, the fellows that I would be flying missions with from England over to Germany.
I went through pilot training and got my wings in May of 1943. Then went to Moses Lake, Washington, and picked up a crew of 10 after taking transition in a B-17 aircraft, which is a 4-engine bomber.
On first blush, when you see that B-17, you think, it's beyond me. But within 5 hours, you own it.
Training equipped a man with the skills necessary to survive in combat. But only true combat could teach a soldier how to win a war. And as many young soldiers, especially those fighting in the 8th Air Force, would discover, a true dogfight was often nothing like a training mission.
And started flying missions, bombing Berlin and Italy and places in Europe.
Our job was to keep the fighters away from the bombers. And if we could sight the fighters first, we would attack them before they could hit the bombers.
The CO calls me in the beginning, and his name is Looper. And he said, I've been looking at your past, your background. He said, I like what I see. He said, I think I'd like you to be a lead crew. And he said, let me tell you what you get if you become a lead crew. On your 6th mission, I'll give you your 1st lieutenancy. And on your 16th, I'll give you your captaincy. And then after 25 missions, if you'll sign up for another tour, I'll give you a majority and you won't have to fly. How's that sound? I said, oh, that sounds fine. So I started that program. To be a lead crew, there's so much practicing. Whenever the mission doesn't fly, they give you a practice mission. So you're absolutely starved for life or sleep. Crew was just kind of a mishmash of mother's boys and awfully young kids. Now, I'm not that much older than they are at that time. I'm 23. But I've got the responsibility of taking care of all these guys.
I shot one Messerschmitt 109. He just got in my way, and I happened to pull the trigger, and it happened to hit him. It was more luck than accuracy.
I found that to be a very exciting endeavor because every time we went out, we were shot up pretty good by either German fighters or German flak. Their flak guns could reach us at about any altitude, and they had a lot of them spread around Germany. So we had some pretty good air battles there. We shot down a lot of German fighters, and they shot down a lot of our planes.
Can indicate how stupid mistakes can almost kill you in some of these missions. In one in particular, in a P-51, we had gun heaters on the guns to heat the guns. Because up there it's 65 degrees below zero up there. And that's cold. If you touch your bare hand onto the airplane aluminum, you'd probably lose your hand. It would just freeze it there. But anyway, I forgot to turn the gun heaters on at low altitude. But so when I got up to altitude, we got into a dogfight, and my guns had all frozen up because I hadn't turned on that gun heater. And they were chasing me, and I couldn't do anything but try to get away. I couldn't shoot back because my guns were all frozen. And one of my squadron mates, he shot one off of my tail, so that way we finally got home.
Our targets was oil refineries, railroad marshaling yards, ball bearing plants, aircraft manufacturing plants, bridges.
Well, we did, in the P-38, we did escort missions, and we did strafing missions where we did dive bombing of bridges and railroad yards and that type of thing. And then when we got the P-51s, why we basically were assigned to escorting bombers.
And on my ninth mission, we were going to bomb a town called Cottbus, Germany, which was about 70 to 80 miles southeast of Berlin.
And then mid-air collisions were not uncommon there. The English weather was such that there'd be 1,000 bombers forming up over England and maybe 600 or 700 fighters forming up. We're all trying to get in the air at the same time. And then many times you'd break out of a cloud and I'd be looking right on the belly of a B-17, maybe 10 feet above me. So I'd have to dive back into the clouds to get away from them and hope I didn't hit anybody going down.
Unfortunately, training and expertise were often not enough. Fighting while airborne in Germany was, on a good day, a matter of both skill and luck. For even the most skilled pilot, the possibility of any of 1,000 errors or accidents was never far away, and even one could send a plane spiraling out of the sky. And for many young men, being shot down was only the beginning of their journey.
We were losing 60 airplanes a day from the 8th Air Force. Now that's a lot of planes. It's 60 men also. There's 10 in each plane.
Our target for that day was at an oil refinery at Luskendorf, Germany. And about 10 minutes before target time, we were encountering a lot of aircraft, 88 millimeter shells that were blowing up in the sky. The Germans were shooting at us.
I was shot down on my 18th mission on a mission to Berlin, and I was hit by a German flak. It knocked out of formation, and the German fighters ganged up on us and shot us up pretty good.
Another B-17 in our squadron got hit and came down upon our aircraft, and the propeller severed the tail off. So I'm separate from the rest of the crew. I didn't know that at the time because I immediately become unconscious.
We had the assignment to feint toward Berlin, skirt the anti-aircraft ring of fire, and drop down to 10,500 feet. At that altitude, the anti-aircraft fire became quite intense, and we had to open up our formation.
And finally, my navigator said, "Harry, look over here to the left." And I look over to the left, and we're on a collision course with another group of planes, what they call shuffling the deck. They went up and over, and I went under. And just at that moment, the upper turret gun was firing, and I'd never heard it fire before. It's right behind the pilot. And I looked off to the left, and I could see a 190, Falk-Wolf 190, was pumping 20 millimeter shells right through the window into the instrument panel, just tearing it up. And I thought, I'm not getting hit, but I knew that the war was over for me. And I thought, it's strange that I'm not getting hit. And then suddenly the plane went into a vertical climb. It won't go up very far. It stalled out, did a hammerhead. Fire broke out in the cockpit. My co-pilot got up to go down, and he just melted there. And I sat there and I reflected, gosh, here I am, just all this training, 7 missions, and it's over.
On the last black shot, here comes the Messerschmitts, and they shot our plane, and they raked it from the nose and top turret, and the 2 engines, between the 2 engines on the right wing.
And German fighters were just terrific. I mean, those guys, I have a lot of respect for them. They, I like the way they would queue up. When you're flying a large group, they find maybe we got 1,000 bombers in the air. They find a group that's got the loosest formation, and they would fly with the same heading you are, maybe a couple thousand feet higher, and they get maybe a mile and a half or a couple of miles ahead, and they split S, as we call it, turn upside down and go right through the formation head on. And then when they did that, chances are we'd get them, but they'd always get a bomber. So, you know, we had so many bombers going over there to hit them with 1,000 bombers or up to 1,500 bombers on one mission. That we finally killed them with numbers. But we had to kill them in numbers.
Every mission was a challenge in itself, because you're taking off maybe 1,000 gallons of gas in that airplane and bomb loads, and just to get off the ground was a miracle with them. But on one particular mission, October 30th of 1944 is Halloween, or day before Halloween. We were to pick up some bombers coming off the target in Hanover, Germany. And we were in P-51s this time. And so we were about 30,000 feet, and our job was to find the bombers coming off of the target. The weather was bad, and we never did find the bombers. And as the weather got worse, the leader said, well, let's try to go through this. And we were maybe at 25, 28,000 feet at that time. And when he started through it, we all closed in on one another and flew in formation, almost wingtip to wingtip, and you fly off of the leader. And we got into this stuff, and then that's the last I saw of the 3. There were 3 other fellows besides me. There was 4 in the flight. And the first thing I knew something was wrong, I was in like in a bottle of milk. You couldn't see anything. It was in a big cloud bank. And then I looked down, it didn't look down. My cords were hanging in my face, my oxygen cord and my radio cord, and I knew I was upside down. And I watched my wing tanks roll off the end of my wings, but you don't know that. You have no horizon. You don't know where. You have no orientation anymore, and vertigo sets in. And the updraft would catch us and shoot us straight up in the air, and then the downdraft would get us, and we'd be going straight down. And when my speedometer would reach maybe 450, 500 miles an hour, I knew I was going straight down. I had no horizon, so I didn't know. And I'd get the stick and pull it back, and airspeed would fall off, and the altimeter would start to climb, and I must be going up. And so that's what we did, up and down in that darn cloud bank. And finally I recovered at about 500-600 feet off the deck in Germany. And the other 3 pilots all went down in that mission. And the Germans never fired a shot at us. It was all the weather that took us down.
In my case, I lost my controls. All I had left was rudder. Didn't have elevator and didn't have aileron, so I'm trying to fly the aircraft with rudder. And the German fighters keep plowing through us and shooting us up.
I had lost the 2 engines on the right side of the wing, and came into a spiral which was ever tightening, which would then eventually be in a tight spin, which you would never get out of.
So I had no choice left but to bail the crew out.
You see, we're strapped in, so I'm not going anywhere. But think of the guys that are standing in the waist gun or the radio operator at his desk. Any place that's not strapped in, when the plane is in this kind of a maneuver, they just get wrecked, they get injured, killed. That's why nobody survived.
Fumes are there remaining. And when you get hit with an armor-piercing incendiary bullet from the German plane, you will normally explode, and we did explode.
I had no control over anything. There was a little door for tail gunners to bail out. But I was immediately unconscious and could not. Centrifugal force had me pinned into where I couldn't move.
I ordered bailout, and we found that my navigator and my top turret gunner were dead from the fire of the Messerschmitt.
So ultimately, it did flip me out. I don't know how, why, or anything like that, but it did flip me out through the newly created hole where the tail was severed.
In the event of disaster, Air Force pilots were all trained to bail out of their plane. The goal was to save as much of the crew as possible, but at speeds of over 700 kilometers per hour, a mid-air bailout was one of the most dangerous maneuvers a pilot would ever have to attempt.
Fortunately, we got the whole crew out except my radio operator. He's the only one that was killed in the air. But just about everyone got injured a little bit, but all in all, I think we were pretty lucky.
I really didn't know what happened to the rest of my crew, or I didn't even think about it, really. I was concerned about myself at the time.
My primary bailout was a Bombay, but I couldn't get back there because the top turret was twisted up and from enemy gunfire and that type thing. So I bailed out of the nose hatch, which is pretty small, but I was a pretty skinny little guy then.
On my way out, I must have hit the Bombay door, became semi-unconscious, I guess, and do not remember pulling a ripcord for my parachute.
Because we had been briefed pretty well by people that experienced in parachuting, that it's a good idea for a lot of reasons to delay opening your chute. So what I did was I pulled a ripcord and held on to it. And when I bailed out, because I didn't have the arms to guide me, and it gave me an airfoil of sorts, and I just spun like a top. So what I would do would hold my chute with my right hand, put my left hand would stop, just almost immediately stop spinning. Just that, because you're flying maybe 120 miles an hour, you're maybe falling at speed. And then we spin everything, switch hands and so forth.
Just a few thousand feet above the earth, I decided, I awakened, I decided, well, maybe I better figure out how I'm going to land.
When I saw the ground moving toward me, I just dropped my arms and chute opened, and I floated on down to safety. When my chute opened, I found that my arms were pinned above my head. I said to myself, there's something wrong here. And there definitely was something wrong, because I looked down like so, and I could see my leg straps flapping in the wind. And I thought, oh my God, my chest strap had caught on my Mae West, and they're both hung up under my chin. And it was freaky that I didn't slip clear out of the harness.
So when I awakened, I was disoriented, and I was up on the windshield of the instrument panel, and I tried to kick open the window, but the window lock was on. When I got to the window lock, the plane was gone. I was now just in a piece of it. The whole thing had just come apart. Seats were gone. upper turret ring was there, so I just rolled out with my backpack and lit in a tree. My face got burned, but the shroud and the silk just caught on the limbs, and I had a landing without incident, just very, very gentle.
As I woke up, I looked down and I'm coming into some trees. So we had been taught to cross our legs so as not to get hung up in the branches of the trees. And went down through the branches and so forth, but the parachute hung up in the top of the tree. So I'm dangling about 15 feet from the ground, and the only thing you can do is open the shrouds of your chute and drop to the ground, and at that point I injured my left ankle.
Luckily, I did land properly. I landed with my back to the wind and slammed me down pretty good. Dragged me a little ways.
When I landed, I couldn't guide myself at all, and I hit heel first and it knocked me out.
Safely landing was only half of the battle. Survivors of planes shot down in Germany now found themselves deep in enemy territory. Even German civilians were often hostile towards American soldiers, and in the dead of winter, the long trek to the Allied front lines was almost a suicide mission.
This was in German territory, and then I started worrying about what the reception would be with the Germans.
Got out my maps and stuff, and they were the wrong maps. They were southern France instead of Germany. So I started going north to go to Sweden, and I probably ran for about 2 hours. Finally, I got so tired, I just laid down.
I decided to come out and start walking northbound.
When I landed at Magdeburg, I was picked up by civilians, and they weren't too happy to see American terrorflieger, as they called us, bomber pilots, and they beat me up pretty good on the ground.
And pretty soon, I looked up and 2 kids were standing there, about 10 years old. And they were so friendly, I thought they were going to help me. So they took me into town, into a little village, like a Hansel and Gretel village. And I was still so tired, I kept sitting down. And pretty soon, maybe 20, 25 people came. And I'm in the center there. And then when they discover who I am, that I'm a pilot, 8th Air Force, they start kicking me. Well, it got extremely dangerous. They were going to kill me.
So I peered up and looked. I saw people heading in my direction, and they were shouting at me. I started to run away from them at first. I started running the opposite direction. When they started shooting at me, I decided, well, I better do something else. I had slammed my body down to the earth, and I started peering up again. The people just kept coming towards me, so I just ended up putting my hands in the air and walking towards them. I surrendered. They encircled me, German civilians. Some had guns, some had the implements, farm implements, forks, shovels. I couldn't understand anything they were saying except for 2 words. There was 2 words I understood. Chicago gangster. Hitler had put out in his propaganda, the media, radio, whatever, that all Air Force people were recruited in Chicago, and they were all former gangsters.
And I got lucky. A neighborhood lady took me in her house, and she seemed to dominate the neighborhood. After a few minutes, I found out she helped me. I think the reason she helped me is because she had a son that was a POW in the United States at New Mexico. But that was a big break for me because A lot of the people got killed that day that was on that same mission. And it was a lot of people that I knew were killed when they landed.
Fortunately, there was a guy there with a gun, an old man from the Wehrmacht, and he fired the gun into the air and then came and pointed it at them, said, "Leave him alone." And as it turned out, he had two sons, one on the Eastern Front and one on the Western Front. And he walked me to a Luftwaffe base.
Anyway, I was hoping this lady would call the Luftwaffe, which is the German Air Force, to turn me in, but she didn't. She called the civilian police, and that scared the hell out of them because the civilians is who you certainly the ones you don't want to get taken prisoner by, because there's a good chance that they would kill you.
They made me disrobe all my clothing off, down to my long underwear. They shredded the fleece-lined suit, the electric flying suit, and I was allowed to put on the bare necessities. I determined by their motions that they wanted me to go to a nearby village, me leading the way and them following me, and frequently why I was kicked in the rear and spat upon. One fellow pulled his gun down, was going to shoot me, and another fellow hit his arm, and the bullet rifled up into the sky. They took me to this nearby village and put me in a garage.
I was apprehended by a forest ranger who had a rifle with a scope that could have followed me for 50 miles. And as a result, he said, "Hands up," and I did. And at this point in time, I'm aching pretty bad. My leg is hurting. And I decided I didn't care whether they caught me or not.
I felt pretty lucky to be eventually turned over to the Luftwaffe.
Naturally, I was very scared, thinking that probably hanging was my future. After a couple of hours, the door opened, and there was a German policeman there. He motioned for me to come out and to walk on a dirt road that led past through the village. He was riding his bicycle, and I was walking. We gradually overtook a farmer with a wagon pulled by a bull. The German policeman ended up, after some conversation with the farmer, he ended up riding the hay wagon, and I pushed his bicycle on into the little town of Eisenberg.
Once captured by the Germans, an American pilot was officially a prisoner of war. While the Geneva Convention did offer them some protection from torture or execution, enhanced interrogation was a common experience. The Germans tried to extract any information they could from their prisoners, and they were very efficient.
When we got to Eisenberg, I was taken into the police station and shoved into this cell. The German guard left, and just a few minutes after he left, I started getting alarmed because there was a lot of prying on my door. People were trying to get the hinges off, get the door open or something, and I thought, well, they're trying to get me out and hang me. I thought that was my thinking.
They transported me to the interrogation for all officers at the Frankfurt on the Oder.
I don't think I got very much sleep that night. I'm sure I didn't. The next morning, I was taken down to headquarters and was shown scorched parts of my aircraft, like oxygen masks, not oxygen masks, oxygen containers, and scorched dog tags or identification tags from some of my crewmen. And they wanted me to identify these. I decided at that time I might be the only survivor of this incident.
When we're walking along, this old guy kept saying, "For you, the war is over." And he was actually joyous. Not everybody embraced the war, particularly an old guy like this. Thought Hitler was a madman. And when we parted, we actually had simpatico and we embraced. And he wished me well. I didn't understand German, he didn't understand English, but we understood each other.
We ultimately came to a place near Frankfurt, Germany called Oberursel.
We had to detrain, walk maybe 100 yards through rubble, get into the station proper. And there was a gal there serving potato soup. And I hadn't eaten for a couple of days. And she came over and offered me this soup. And I said, yeah, I'd take one. So I wolfed it down and she said, would you like another? And the kindness, it got to me. I started crying. And she took me in her arms and acted almost like a mother. It was just the most wonderful experience where the enemy holds you. And I had two occasions, the old man and this woman. It just hard to explain it all.
There, after a day in a little cell with some sort of soup, they let me into an interrogator.
And we had heard about this place in training in the United States as being an interrogation center where all prisoners of war had to go through this camp and be interrogated almost daily. I was there for 9 days.
The British had briefed us that don't be surprised at anything the German intelligence knows about you, because they have the best intelligence in the world. And I found out later that what that said was certainly true.
Everybody would be placed in isolation, small cells, and the Germans would try to extract information from you.
The one thing that he was trying to find out, where was the 10th man of the crew. They had accounted, after picking up the rest of the crew, they wanted to know where was the 10th man. What happened? We were only flying with 9 men that day, 1 waist gunner short. And I guess it drove them nuts that they would have a airman roaming around Germany that they couldn't account for.
They could speak very good English. Some of the things they wanted to know, as I remember, was where you were stationed in England, what your target was for that day, what kind of a plane were you flying in, and a lot of different things that actually a tail gunner would not have any answers for at all.
Several times they asked me lots of questions, and I would say, I can't give you anything but name, rank, and serial number. And that made them pretty unhappy, and they would do things to aggravate me, like turn up the heat in my room and stuff like that.
And our argument was that we didn't know anything more, and under the Geneva Convention, that's all we were entitled to have to give him.
When brutality did not yield the answers they wanted, German soldiers often tried more creative tactics.
The Germans offered me more food if I divulged more information. And I almost caved in because I was getting quite hungry at that time.
They finally brought me in and offered me a drink of wine, and I wouldn't take it because I know I've got a loose tongue when I have a few drinks.
About the 7th day in this small cell, the interrogator came in. He carried a large folder. He had the answers to everything that he had asked me. So actually he was wasting my time and I was wasting his.
He never did get anything out of me other than I was with Looper. There's nothing they can do with the information while you don't know anything. It's just a game they play.
When I told him the last time, I said, I can give you only name, rank, and serial number. He started in, he told me things about myself that I'd forgotten. He told me where I went to high school, told me what sports I participated in, where my aircraft was parked in England, and all kinds of things. And I was flabbergasted. I couldn't believe what I was hearing.
And there was 3 or 4 young German soldiers in there. One of them could speak English pretty good. He started asking me questions that didn't have anything to do with warfare. Some of them were Adolf Hitler's picture, a painting of Adolf was up on the wall, and I had glanced up there. This fellow noticed this. He said, do you know who that is? I said, yes. What is your opinion of him? Well, realizing my perilous situation, I didn't have any opinion at all. Then they started grilling me about cowboys and Indians, Hollywood. From there, I was taken to my first prison camp at Wetzlar, Germany.
I was transported to Stalag Luft 3, which was near the old Czechoslovakian border.
Stalag Luft 3 was probably the most famous of all the German prison camps, as immortalized in the classic film, The Great Escape. Over 11,000 Allied men were held in the camp between 1942 and 1945. For them, the war was over, but their troubles were only just beginning. As a prisoner of war, a soldier was afforded the luxury of knowing that he was relatively safe from harm. However, that did not mean the conditions were ideal. In fact, for some, life in the prison camps was worse than it was in combat.
It was called a transitional camp, and I was only there for about probably 3 weeks. That was my first introduction really to prisoner of war life, and you met lots of people, other prisoners in this camp that were had stories. Everyone had a story to tell.
In that camp, they had separated the Brits from the Americans because more Americans were getting shot down.
We had 5 compounds, which is about 10,000 officers in that same camp.
We had 10,000 prisoners, all officers. Nobody had to work. If there was any work to be done, it was done by the Russians. And they slept on the ground, and we slept in barracks. There was 2,500 to a barracks.
First part of my capture was summertime, and walking around the camp, there was some recreational footballs, basketballs, and baseballs.
We had fellowship, we had German classes, we had salesmanship classes. We didn't figure the war was going to last 2 weeks. This won't be a big problem. But it went on 9 months.
Some of the things I probably will never forget was the condition that some of the prisoners were in there. Some of them had been in very devastating incidents and whatnot. I remember this one P-38 pilot that didn't get out of his P-38 quick enough, and he was scorched. His face and hands were, his ears were gone, and he looked pretty sad.
The first duty that I was assigned was to dig out tree stumps because we knew that the Germans were short on fuel, and actually the allotment of fuel for cooking and for heat was like 1 briquette per day per prisoner. So that would keep the home fire going too long. A briquette, by the way, is compressed coal. So we supplemented that by digging out the tree stumps, cutting them up, and stockpiling them to the fuel supply. Got very cold, and what do you do when it's cold? You find every bit of clothing you have and every blanket you can find, and sit in the bunk and shiver. The only time you really got out of your bunks was number one, the first thing the Germans did in the morning was roll call. And the last thing in the afternoon was roll call.
I found myself feeling sorry for myself and walking the fences, and we didn't have to work, a lot of idle time, and so it was frustrating. I was wondering why I was there, or why. In a way, I was also wondering about my buddies that I worked with for 6 months or so, why they had to die and I'm still alive. I always had that on my mind also.
I got down to 115 pounds. I normally weigh 165. My upper arm was the same size as my wrist. So you can see we really lost a lot of weight. We'd look at each other and we could count all the ribs.
We lived on the grace of the American Red Cross through the Swiss Red Cross distributing some food parcels.
Red Cross parcels were delivered to warehouses near the prison camp. And we would get a Red Cross parcel occasionally, one parcel for 2 men. There was different products in Red Cross parcel. I remember powdered milk, cheese, meat, soap, cigarettes were some of the items in there. After a couple of weeks there, maybe 3, I started hearing the Allies' guns, artillery and whatnot again. And we all kind of imagined that the Germans would let us go and that we'd be overtaken by the Allies. This didn't happen.
In the dead of winter, moving from one prison camp to another was not an easy task. Soldiers had to walk tens of thousands of miles through the snow in below zero weather, and the marching was always done at night. For many prisoners, the transfer order was a death sentence.
Early 1945, the word came down from Adolf Hitler to march us out.
The Russians were making an attack from the east, and their target was Breslau. And having been not too far from Breslau in this camp, they decided they would have to move us under the terms of the Geneva Convention out of the line of fire.
That was in February. Himmler had instructed our CO, the German CO, a major, that had been an instructor in Santa Barbara, to kill the prisoners. And that's when they stopped the food. And we felt that we were mostly bedridden by that time. We felt they were going to burn the camps. But our CO, who was Zemke, knew of this instructions. And this German major told Himmler, come and do it yourself. He wasn't going to do it. So that was kind of an iffy situation.
We had to evacuate it was at late in the evening, and it was a blizzard.
At midnight on the 26th of January, they pulled us out of the barracks, half foot of snow, 30 below with the wind chill.
And they gave us 30 minutes to fall out. We fell out in the blizzard and stood there for a long time before one day I said to myself that I can't hang around here too long because it's something I hadn't mentioned. I had a infested toe from an ingrown toenail, and I said, I can't survive a march, so I'm going to step out of line and hope I can make it, because I figured I'd rather be shot than die on the march in a blizzard.
We spent that night walking or marching, whatever you want to call it, to dawn. And when dawn came, we spent the first night in the ditches on the side of the road because we would not march at the daylight due to the possibility of being shot by our own Air Force.
Even for those prisoners lucky enough to be transferred via train, conditions were dismal, all without the knowledge of an eventual destination.
One particular day, we were all taken from the camp to the train station, Wetzlar, and we all boarded boxcars.
Designed for 45 soldiers, and we had about 75 in there.
So you were sitting body to body, 2 guards per car. There was one large door with 2 guards in attendance at the door, 1 on each side, with their arms, of course. We took off. We didn't know where we were going.
The temperature during this period of time, I believe, was below 0 at all times.
And we started down the railroad track, scared to death wondering what's going to happen to us. We didn't know where we were going to the concentration camp or what was going to happen. Were they going to take us someplace and shoot us, or what was going on? The
train was very slow en route. It was one of those old coal burners, steam engine. Oftentimes it would pull into a wooded area because Allies were looking for trains, and it had been known that oftentimes they would strafe trains. It was only about 120 miles or something like that. It took several days for us to get there.
I had an very infected foot there that was had that operation, and I had to standing room only. So I tied my blanket to the sort of a little rafter inside the boxcar, would hang on because there's some pretty sick people that had to lie down, and we tried to make room for all we could.
They allowed us to sit on the floor, but the guy in front of you would sit in your lap area, spread your legs out, and the guy behind you would do the same thing.
But we had people die just on that long trip because we were on the boxcar about a week.
Our destination proved to be Nuremberg, Germany.
Now, the camp in Nuremberg was an abandoned Polish work camp.
The camp at Nuremberg was originally left to rot after larger camps were built to house Polish prisoners. But after Operation Barbarossa, the massive influx of Russian prisoners necessitated its reopening. Soon, American prisoners were sent as well. The camp was never remodeled to accommodate the larger numbers.
It was sort of a hellhole. It was a pretty bad place. When we finally got unloaded there and marched in, we found our group from our compound at Stalag 3, which is our main camp. And I was lucky I hooked onto that group and was with them for several weeks.
At Nuremberg, I was in a barracks. The barracks were very crude, of course. They had probably been utilized for other reasons before they made a prison camp out of it. My bed was the floor. I didn't have a regular bunk or anything. My bed was the floor, and we were always a little cold and hungry. We did find out that some of the prisoners that had been there for many years, some of the English and French prisoners, had garnered enough parts to a radio, and they made a radio. The Germans never did find out about this radio. They listened to BBC every evening. The news would be passed around ear to ear about how the Allies were doing. This news was one thing that really kept us going, because we knew that the Allies were really forced them, and And of course, the German version of news was a lot different than what we were hearing. They were always winning and telling about how many Americans were killed and things like that.
As many prisoners would find out, German guards were only one of the dangers to life as a POW. Allied fire could be just as dangerous.
One night, the British Pathfinders came in and dropped flares around the marshal yards. And the English Lancasters came in one at a time and started to drop bombs in the marshal yards. There was no severe damage to us in the work camp.
You were afraid of your own Air Force. I remember in Nuremberg, 2 different times when I was there, the English bombed the city of Nuremberg, which was, the prison camp was just on the outskirts of Nuremberg. They bombed it at night, and it was everybody was being very religious and pulling blankets over their head and laying on the floor, figuring that if one of those bombs would land in the camp, that would be it, you know.
However, the next morning, the 8th Air Force contingent came in and dropped a pretty heavy concentration of bombs, and they caught an ammunition train, which I guess was the target to begin with, in the marshal yards. And this ammunition train exploded. Our barracks that we were in went sideways from the explosion, and we were actually looking up at clear blue sky.
After a couple of weeks there, we started hearing the Allies' artillery again, and we hoped again that we would, Germans would let us go. No such luck.
So as a result, they had to move us to a further camp, which was called Moosburg.
The more a prisoner was put through, the greater the desire to escape often became. Many men, indeed, found transfers to be the perfect opportunity for this, as the marches were sparsely guarded. But the question remained, was trekking through the German countryside alone worth the risk? Was it any safer than remaining a prisoner?
10,000 prisoners, I found out later, were on this march from Nuremberg to Moosburg, kind of close to Munich.
We left there about noon one day, and we got hit that afternoon when we were marching. We got hit by American fighters. They strafed us because they really obviously didn't know that we were Americans.
We call it a march, but it didn't even resemble a march because guys were strung out so bad, and some of them had injuries and whatnot. They had a hard time keeping up with the group.
It was like a rowdy bunch of people walking along. There was no discipline in that, except for one time when we were under the control of the SS. And they had some Hitler Jungen, young German kids, 14, 15, 16. And they were our guards for a contingent period of time there. And that was a little different. They towed the mark and shot a couple people. A disturbance on the road took place, and we all tried to hit the ditches to keep away from this runaway team of horses.
It killed a few guys, injured some fellows, not too far from my position on the march. There was some false alarms after that, because we were all so jumpy and nervous, you know. Somebody, after they reformed our columns and took off again, somebody screamed attack, and guys just took off every direction, any direction. I came to my particular group was in the area of a small city, rural city. I took off across the yard and through the backyard and came to a chicken coop. I didn't have time to try to find out where the gate was. I put my head down and busted into the wire fence, and it almost knocked me unconscious. Actually, it was a false alarm, so we were all garnered together again and proceeded on our way.
I didn't know where we were going. I didn't know what was going to happen, and I decided I'd try to escape, and which is no big deal because you know, you march at night, and the German guards were scarce. They had dogs that were tired, German shepherds that were exhausted, and so I decided that I would try to escape. And as it turned out, I saw my co-pilot that I had seen in several weeks sitting by a tree, and his name is Tex Baldy, and I walked up to Tex and greeted him and said, "Tex, would you like to try to escape?" And he said, "Yes." So that night, we did escape, no big deal.
We were instructed not to make any effort to escape if we were shot down.
We knew that the war was just going to be over very shortly, and you were weighing one thing against another, and most of the prisoners felt like that it was better to stay with the group and be liberated as a group rather than strike out on your own.
We did not attempt to escape due to the fact that you are so far in Germany that you did not, it was too far to try and get to the front lines.
Those who did escape gained their freedom at a high risk. Most were so off course from their original destinations that any maps they owned were useless. The German landscape was vast, and without being able to speak the language, any civilian was a potential enemy. Indeed, Adolf Hitler personally ordered the execution of 50 POWs who were caught in the attempt to escape Stalag Luft III.
You know, there are thousands of people marching down the road, and you see a German car coming towards you with the hoods on the lights. They blind you, but they can't see them from above. And so I told Tex, I said, well, there's woods. We're marching alongside the woods, and when a car comes by that looks like, you know, blinds us a little bit, I'll tug your coat and we'll take off for the woods, which we did. Light was coming, car was coming with the lights on. I grabbed Tech's coat and pulled on it, and here we went. We went over the banks of a canal and into the canal, waist deep, holding our blankets above our head, until thousands of people marched by. We were just standing there scared to death and halfway frozen. But eventually everyone passed by, and we were still there. We're still free. And but now what do? We got no compass, we got no maps, we don't know the area. But we thought we were free, which is of course a little bit ridiculous.
Some nights we slept under the stars. We didn't get to places where we would have a cover. I do recall spending one night in church. There was prisoners on the floor, under the pew, on the pews.
We slept one night in a barn. We sneaked into a German barn and slept there. The second day out, we were trying to skirt a little village, and we couldn't figure out how to get by without them seeing us because there were some French workers in the field. And we tried to go between the French workers and the city in a little town. And we got about halfway by the town, and some old man, he was older than me then, he was probably 50. He came running out, and he said, hollered at us like who are we, and all that. I tried to tell him we were Frenchmen, and he spit out a few words of French, and I told him nix for staying. He wasn't even impressed with my German. He let out a big holler, which meant he's letting the town know that he's got, you know, someone suspicious. And I told Tex, I said, we got to make the woods, which is up a hill, and I put my foot behind him and pushed him. He fell, and we started up the hill. We got about halfway up there. It dawned on me that so we find the woods. What happens then? Because the German woods and forests, they're no different than parks, perfect parks in the United States. I mean, the woods are always so clean. But it didn't matter because the old man let out a scream, and the whole town was after us, and they caught us before we got to the woods. I was pretty well scared at that point, and so was Tex. But they took us down to the Burgermeister's office, which is in German is mayor, and they stood us in front of the Burgermeister in his office, and he's a little fat German. He's looked like the movies, like he should be a German mayor in a war or something. But we stood there maybe an hour, and he'd look at us and shake his head and talk on the telephone. And lo and behold, we're standing there after about an hour or so. This big guy must have been about 6'5", 6'6", little beetle-browed guy walked through with his rifle and walked into the next room, and Tex and I could hear him cocking his rifle. And I told Tex, out of the corner of my mouth, I says, "We're dead, Tex." He says, "Yeah, I know." The first 100 yards or so was terrorizing because we thought maybe we'd get a bullet in our head. It turned out we marched and maybe walked maybe 3 kilometers. And we looked ahead, and in the barnyard there was a bunch of soldiers. As we got closer, we recognized them being American POWs. We didn't know them personally, but it's a group that marched all the way from Posen in Poland, and had been captives for a long time.
We marched at night sometimes. I remember one night we marched all night long, and you couldn't hardly see the prisoner in front of you. You would put your hands on his shoulder so you knew where to go, and the guy behind you would do the same thing. We didn't know what our destination would be on this trip. It took about 12 days to do it. Our destination on this trip was a place called Moosburg, Germany. One of the largest prison camps in Germany.
Moosburg, the final destination for many Allied prisoners, was a massive establishment deep in the heart of German territory. While some prisoners may have recognized this move as part of a systematic retreat, most others were unaware. For them, the journey seemed endless. Misguided by German misinformation, most were unsure if they would ever make it home.
76,000 prisoners of all sizes, shapes, and forms, and there was Russians there, there was Polish there, everybody in free French, and of course Brits and Americans.
So they tagged us on with this group, and we was with them a few days, and it was kind of tough because he had a tech sergeant in charge. It was a pretty hideous guy and overbearing with us, but we, in one particular case, we fell out. We'd go to a German barn to sleep, and then we'd fall out the next morning, and they'd count, and they counted. They came up short one man, and this German tech sergeant walked back in the barn, took a pitchfork and went to work punching in the hay, and we let out a scream, and we knew that he'd got his man. And we marched out of there, and he left us a guy with full of pitchfork holes, left it for the German farmer to take care of. Anyway, make a long story short, we escaped. We decided after 2 or 3 more days we'd try another escape, and we did that by when we were sleeping in a barn. We looked around and found out they had a tool room where they kept the plows and that type thing, and it was adjacent to the barn we're sleeping in. And I told Tex we'd try to make it that that night, if we could do it, we'd try it anyway. And so we covered up in the hay and laid there for a couple of hours till it was so quiet you couldn't believe it. And I knew that everyone must be asleep. And I tugged on Tex, and we crawled out of there and crawled through the tool shed and over a wooden fence. We had to walk through the barnyard. We walked very slowly. I was scared to death. Went over the fence and walked about probably a quarter of a mile from the direction that we would come in, and spread our blankets under a tree and went to sleep. So we were escapees again, and we felt pretty lucky about that.
The Russian prisoners were a sad lot, I thought. We did receive Red Cross parcel while we were there, in addition to the German black bread and a bowl of soup occasionally. But the Russians never received any Red Cross parcels. They were walking skeletons. They didn't look like they would last another day or two. They looked so pitiful.
There were some original barracks there, but they were all taken up long before we got there. But this was just nothing but a big barbed wire pen. Had to be at least a half-mile square, and as the prisoners were coming in, no room in any of the barracks or that. We just went out and slept on the ground under the stars.
But luckily, the worst was finally over for these heroes. World War II was coming to a close, and with that, freedom was imminent.
We kept our eyes open for what looked like a good place to rest and sleep. And we saw this one place. It was quiet, didn't have any chickens, didn't have any barking dogs, and a very quiet-looking place, neat-looking place. And I looked at Tex and I says, "Are you thinking the same thing I am?" And he said, "Yes." So we very quietly marched up to the front door, which is about maybe 200 feet. And I stood by the door. I told Tex to knock on the door, and I stood out about 3 or 4 feet away. And a lady came to the front door, an elderly lady, and she looked at us and looked scared, but not terrified. And I said real quick, I said, "Ich kriege Gefangenen," which just tells her we're prisoners. And that seemed to relax her a little bit. And but then her husband, the old man, came to the door, and God, he seemed to be tickled to death to see us. And he said, come and see. So we went in, and he says, "Come on." He wanted us to go to his basement with him. And a situation like that sounds terrifying, but we knew better than that at that point. You learn people. What he did was shows he had a telephone, and he could listen to British broadcasting, and he knew that Germany was in big trouble. And so I think he probably thought we could be insurance policy for him.
At this time, we knew that the war, that we were about to be overtaken. Prisoners were knocking the fences down, and the guards were still walking their beat. They weren't paying any attention to what prisoners might be doing. There was a group of prisoners that even tore a hole in the fence to where they could go downtown. Moosburg was only about a mile away, the city of Moosburg. They went downtown and tore down the German flag, signed their names to it. I believe that flag is on display somewhere in the world. On the 28th of April, 1945, we saw one of our artillery, Bill Elmer we called him, artillery planes come over the camp.
And so we hung around there 2 days, and Tex was up in the bedroom they'd given us, and I heard him let out a gasp, and I said, "What's wrong, Tex?" And he says, "Take a look." We looked out the front door, and there was 4 German soldiers coming toward the front door. And the first thing I thought about doing was jumping out the window and running, and I think that'd be the most foolish thing we could do. And because I asked myself, what are German soldiers doing in a farmyard? As it turned out, they forced their way in. The Germans tried to stop them, but they came in anyway. So Tex and I just had to go downstairs and face them, and that wasn't easy. But as it turned out, it was really safe because I had my military rank on my collar. I was a first lieutenant at the time, and so was Tex. And I had my flight jacket on, and we told them real quickly. I said, we're ex-Kriegsgefangenen, and as it turned out, we were there several days with the German farmers and with the German soldiers. And we played cards and did a lot of things, got along pretty good. And strangely enough, they slept in the barn and we slept in the bedroom. Sounds strange. Sounds like fiction. It's not, but it isn't. It's true.
On the evening of, I believe, April 28th, a colonel came up the road of the German prison camp there at Moosburg, and with a white flag on a Jeep, and went into the commandant's office and supposedly make arrangements to take over the camp the next day.
One day we're sitting in the yard, they're just passing time away, and we see an Liaison aircraft flying over. And I could see it was an American airplane.
P-51s shaking their wings, P-47s. We knew at this time that it wasn't going to be long.
And I told German farmer that I said, we have to check this out, see if that's an American aircraft, and if the Americans are anywhere nearby. And he okayed his French worker to make a trip down to an intersection about perhaps 3/4 of a mile away. And he came back in an hour or so with a staff sergeant, 2 staff sergeants and a Jeep, American staff sergeants. And boy, was that ever a thrill to Tex and I. We were just tickled to death to see these guys. And we let them know right away, don't be looting these people, leave them alone or befriend us. And it was a great feeling to see these staff sergeants.
The Liberation Day itself, you could have been hurt.
The guards had been instructed to remove and lay down their arms at 6 a.m. and to go into their own barracks. And they would become prisoners of the Allies. Someone from that barracks start the fire at that Jeep.
There was quite a bit of fire back and forth. The Allies were firing, and the Germans were, not the guards, but the infantry, of what there was left of it, was firing back and forth. So all the prisoners were laying on the ground, hoping not to be hit. But the battle was over. It lasted about 3 hours, and that was it.
The war was over on May 1st. The towers were empty on April 28th. The Germans had left. When the Russians showed up, they had 140 head of cattle. And we started barbecuing, and it didn't work. The food we ate came right back up.
The troops came in and started registering names and ranks of the prisoners, examining them from the standpoint of physical condition, and started to organize it.
And I recall trucks, Army trucks coming into the camp, and the prisoners were so happy that they would inundate the trucks, and the first Jeeps that came through, you couldn't hardly see the trucks or Jeeps, either one, for the guys that was landing on them, looking for a little extra food or what, they were just so happy to be liberated.
We went to the 14th Armored Division headquarters, which wasn't too far away, and that belonged to Patton's Third Army. And boy, did they treat us with open arms. Boy, it was a big thrill. And it was one of the big thrills of my life to see these Americans again, that were POWs. Within a couple of days, we were just sitting around doing nothing, and this bunch of German POWs came by. They'd been captured by the Americans, and lo and behold, guess who was in front? The stack sergeant that stuck the pitchfork in our guy. And so I told this NCO I was talking to, I said, boy, that guy's a real rat. And he said, tell me about it. When I told Major the story, he says, well, Lieutenant, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We'll take him out in the field, and we'll have a court-martial, and we'll shoot him. And I said, oh, my God. Anyway, I didn't want it to happen because they're not supposed to do that to POWs.
After about 8 days of processing at this camp by our allies, Americans, we were trucked to a nearby airfield at Landshut, Germany. C-47s were waiting for us. We were flown to Le Havre, France for further processing.
I'm in France now at the Camp Lucky Strike. So I went out on hook the thumb of my ride to Le Havre. I get to Le Havre and they're loading boats with guys. So I went over to a man typing and I said, I'd like to get on this boat. And he said, you have to have orders. And I said, okay. So I saw a captain standing there. I went over to him and I said, sir, you got time for a war story? And I told him a war story, and he said, just a minute. He took me over to the same guys that cut this guy some orders, and they put me on the boat. I got to go home.
And then I got to see my crew members again, so they were all alive, and I was very happy about that.
I got home to my parents in June of that year, June 1945.
I'm the sole survivor. 9 guys were lost that day.
It was a pretty exciting adventure, no question about it. And all those years, or all those months, it's unbelievable. I did a book called Bulletproof, which turned out to be very successful because I was able to get in more detail on some of the aspects of the total operation. And that's about it, I guess.
So take care, and God bless you all.
Till I was there that I knew I'd made it. It wasn't till I More than 42 million Americans have served in the United States Armed Forces. Of those, fewer than 3,600 have been awarded our nation's highest military honor. And of those, only one has been a military working dog handler.
Hi, Mom and Dad. I guess you thought I'd forgot about you because I haven't written, but I've been busy lately. For a while we didn't have much to do, but now things are pretty well stirred up. We had a mortar attack yesterday. We got about 40 or 50 rounds.
Bob Hope, who visited our men there as he had in 2 previous wars, said of them, "I guess you know what kind of guys your sons and brothers and the kids next door are." Well, yes, we do know. I think we just let it slip our minds for a time.
Duke got a small piece behind his ear, and we took him to Cu Chi to the division vet, and they sewed him up. He's okay now.
We have learned at a terrible and a brutal cost that retreat does not bring safety, and weakness does not bring peace. And it is this lesson that has brought us to Vietnam.
1965 marked the 10th anniversary of the United States' involvement in the Vietnam War. When Lyndon Johnson assumed office in 1963, he became the 3rd U.S. president to struggle with this conflict, both internationally and here at home. Throughout his presidency, he frequently had to address public concerns and confusion over our involvement in Southeast Asia.
What are our goals in that war-stained land? First, we intend to convince the communists that we cannot be defeated by force of arms or by superior power. Second, once the communists know, as we know, that a violent solution is impossible, then a peaceful solution is inevitable.
Johnson struggled to clearly define the Vietnam War and often used our 2 previous world wars and Korea as a basis for continued involvement. However, he failed to recognize that Vietnam was a very different war. Vietnam was a civil war, whereas the previous wars, most notably World War I and World War II, were wars based on one country's domination over another.
The war in Vietnam is not like these other wars, yet finally, war is always the same. It is young men dying in the fullness of their promise.
Another unique aspect of this war in Southeast Asia was that our previous wars were won by a strategy of taking and occupying land until the enemy had no room to hide. But in Vietnam, we abandoned that strategy. To win the war, the whole idea was to kill the enemy, and to do so by using overwhelming firepower and superior technology, while continuing to engage them with a steady increase of soldiers. It was a war of attrition, and this strategy made Vietnam a very different war for America. Some would argue it made the war unwinnable. But in the midst of all of the technology and strategic confusion, one resource emerged, proving itself to be invaluable in the field.
Dogs.
In particular, scout dogs.
In Vietnam, dogs and handlers together braved countless dangers and are credited with saving over 10,000 American lives.
The idea is for the scout dog is to provide a silent alert. Even though they led the patrol, their job was to find the enemy before the enemy found them.
In Vietnam, the jungles were deadly. Using their senses to see, smell, and hear dangers before they claimed American lives, dogs were often the difference between life and death. Separated only by a leash, handlers and dogs cared, shared, and looked out for each other. They were teammates.
Handler and scout dog had an incredible bond. They shared just about everything there was except for his toothbrush.
They get smart. After you teach them about explosive and you walk them into tripwires and it goes bang, they learn. And they learn by you too, about your feelings, and if you're scared, the dog's scared. The dog gets scared, you better be scared.
But the problem was, most people had not heard of dogs in the military. Reactions among military members when they first heard of them being used ranged from amusement to
bewilderment, because nobody had ever heard of it. I never heard of the program.
So many people didn't know there were even dogs in Vietnam. Oh, it's too hot for dogs.
Despite the documented success of canine courage and valor from previous wars, the ability and tremendous value of canine operations remained largely unknown. In fact, much of the information about canine programs had been kept under wraps to avoid revealing our capabilities in the field to the enemy.
It turns out that the Army, as does the Air Force and the Navy, employs dogs in their military work. The Air Force and the Navy use them primarily for sentry and security work. The Army had started out a number of years before learning from the Brits about a tracker dog program.
Tracker dogs pursued the enemy through the dense jungle. They also located lost soldiers and downed pilots. Water dogs were trained to smell enemy divers hidden beneath the surface of rivers and harbors. Scout dogs walked point in front of human patrols. They searched out enemy traps and ambushes.
Scout dog teams in Vietnam probably had the most difficult mission of all. They were the forward element of any patrol going into combat, and as such would be the first ones to make contact with the enemy.
Walking point, you were the front guy. Actually, the dog was number one, you were number two, and behind you, you had a member of the platoon doing what we call riding shotgun. He was supposed to be there to protect me. But to be perfectly honest, it was a dog. I loved him and I trusted him.
The scout dog team operated anywhere from 100 to 150 yards in advance of the advanced scouts. They were out there totally naked on their own, which meant that the only thing as a scout dog handler that was going to save your life was that dog.
The Army was extremely interested in the value of a program that would help them in the very difficult and changeable terrain in Vietnam. But it took more than just dogs. Courage and ability had to be at both ends of the leash.
The handler had an important job as much as the dog. The dog could make the alert, but it was up to the handler to interpret his dog and what that dog was telling him. Where was the enemy? Was it a booby trap, a mine, a tripwire, punji stick, that type of thing?
It was not a job that most people would want to have, which I have always held the scout dog handlers in very high regard because of that.
There was one other thing these volunteers hadn't heard about. Scout dogs and their handlers represented a new and unparalleled capability, a capability that quickly gained the attention of the enemy. When their presence began to hurt the North Vietnamese, they decided that they were going to take them out. Handlers and dogs entered the war with a bounty on their heads.
With the Viet Cong finding the scout dog team so effective, they placed a bounty on them. The amount of the bounty varied what year it was in Vietnam, the location in Vietnam. The Viet Cong also knew that there was not an endless supply of scout dog teams like there were infantrymen, and that's why they put a high price on their heads.
There was a bounty on our heads because if you could take out the scout dog team, you took out their walking radar.
When the NVA and the Viet Cong began to realize the effectiveness of the scout dog teams, they would try to take the team out, even if it meant giving away an ambush position or giving away some kind of a defensive position that they were in, rather than have the unit the scout dog team was working with get the jump on them. So there were certainly occasions where they came under early fire.
He's number one target with that dog. One dog that lasted 20 minutes going down off the mountainside. They shot the dog and didn't shoot any American. So that goes to show you how good these dogs did their job.
These guys had the toughest job that you can have. They walked point. These handlers and these dogs saved thousands of GIs from either death or being maimed.
Described as a steadfast, unassuming young man who was very proud of family and his sense of place, Bob Hartsock grew up in a rural area of the Allegheny Mountains south of Everett, Pennsylvania. His dad, Kenneth, was a World War II veteran and owned a small farm where everyone in the family pitched in. Bob learned early on the value of hard work, commitment to family and friends, and the importance of teamwork, which was further developed through his love of sports, especially baseball.
Bob always had a smile on his face. He was really outgoing and would do anything for you. And that's just the way he was.
Your whole memory of Bob was always joyful.
We grew up together on the farm, did a lot of farming together. He and I used to clean the barns out.
One thing that I most vividly remember is him throwing a dead snake on me. Me screaming and yelling. That's one of the most vivid childhood memories that I have.
Where I first met him was a little church. He was probably about 11 and I was probably about 13. I said, let's go smoke a cigarette. He said, I never smoked a cigarette before. So we walked up the road from the church and we lit it up. We had the pack of chewing gum. We thought that was going to save us. We was too dumb to know any different.
We met probably in 7th grade and we had common interests. We both hunted and fished a lot. There wasn't a lot of entertainment in our area, so we spent a lot of time in the woods and on the streams.
Bob was never satisfied unless he was outside. He loved it outside all the time. He was smart. You couldn't trick him in the woods.
He was just a fun-loving kid. He liked playing ball.
We played baseball in high school. He didn't play every inning of every game, but when he got in, he did well. And I never heard Bob complain that I should be playing or I should get more time. He was just the consummate team player, is probably the best way to describe Bob.
Teamwork and a willing attitude to help others became synonymous for how people viewed Bob Hartsock. As for himself, he would later discover they were essential traits for leadership and even survival.
During the rehearsal for our graduation, one of our advisors said, you people should cherish this time because it's the last time you're going to be together as a class. And you know, when you're 18 years old, bring on the world. You know, we're invincible.
I have asked the commanding general, General Westmoreland, what more he needs to meet this mounting aggression. He has told me, and we will meet his needs. I have today ordered to Vietnam the Air Mobile Division, and certain other forces which will raise our fighting strength from 75,000 to 125,000 men almost immediately. Additional forces will be needed later, and they will be sent as requested. This will make it necessary to increase our active fighting forces by raising the monthly draft call from 17,000 over a period of time to 35,000.
We were drafted August 7, 1967, Cumberland, Maryland. 19 of us from this area went together on the same buses to Fairmont, West Virginia. The ones that passed went on to Clarksburg, and the ones that didn't pass the physical came back to Cumberland. Well, we were lucky, so we all got to go to Clarksburg, and then they put us on an old two-propeller airplane and a real rattle trap, and sent us to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and that's where we did our basic training. Bobby was a real good soldier. I mean, he was #1 in physical fitness. Just the epitome of a real soldier.
He could really move. If we'd had track at our high school in those days, Bob would have probably been outstanding. He could really run and was really agile.
He would outshoot us, do more push-ups than anybody.
I first met Bob when I was assigned to the 44th Scout Dog Platoon in early July of 1968.
As Bob Hartsock transitioned from a quiet country setting to being in the Army, he developed new friendships easily, such as with veterinary technician Lamar Smith. But no one would get to know him better than Roger Forbes.
I almost can't talk about Bob Hartsock without talking about Roger, because they were very close friends. They were inseparable.
We both went to Fort Bragg. He was in one company, I was in another. For our next assignment, we got in the same company. Went through AIT, infantry.
Bob and Roger graduated from advanced infantry training together, but they didn't receive any orders. Instead, they found themselves left behind as most of the other graduates headed for Germany.
Everybody went to Germany, but 16 of us. We was holdovers, so we stayed like 11 weeks, and we finally got orders. We didn't have to take them, but for Fort Benning, Georgia, to be scout dog handler. So nobody didn't know what a scout dog handler was until they said, well, we're handling dogs are going to be like an MP. So we went to dog school together.
Like all enlisted handlers, they volunteered for Scout Dog School. Officers, on the other hand, were different.
We graduated from OCS. We all got our orders on the same day. And there was another officer and myself who got orders for Scout Dog Training School. We didn't know what to expect, but when Carl and I both got orders for the infantry platoon Scout Dog, we looked at each other in complete bewilderment.
Larry Hughes, a newly commissioned second lieutenant, learned about the Scout Dog program when he read his orders. At the time, he had no idea that his future and Bob Hartsock's were destined to come together a year later in a remote region of South Vietnam called Giao Trang. All he knew was he had no idea where he was going, much less what he would be doing the next day.
When we got to Fort Benning, it was just training that you wouldn't believe with these dogs. You didn't know how, I guess how you say, smart a dog can get.
When you went in, you were stripped of rank, treated just like anybody else in the program. You were given your own German Shepherd within the first several days, and you went through the same training as all the men did who were going to be serving in the Scout Dog platoons in Vietnam.
Hi Rita and all. I guess you thought I wasn't going to write, but I have been pretty busy. We haven't done much but get our things put away and draw our equipment. We had 7 classes yesterday on safety and care and equipment. It sounded better than what it will be, I believe. We have to spend 10 weeks out in the field, and they let us come in once in a while to shower and clean up and for passes on the weekend, if we get any. They said we'll sleep in tents and eat sea rations. Sounds real good, huh? Well, it's about time to fall out, so we'll write more when I have time.
A dog and a person just don't bond. Once you get your dog, you can pet him and tell him to sit and down and things like that, and he'll do it. And then all of a sudden, the dog ain't doing it because you told him to, and he's doing it because he wants to.
I love dogs, and I had a great German Shepherd, but as is always the case with non-commissioned officers and particularly young second lieutenants, they tend to give you the biggest, nastiest German Shepherds that they have in the compound, and my dog was over 100 pounds and was a beast, but we got along great. It was a great training program. I loved it.
One of the most important lessons taught at the school is that your dog's care is critical. Handlers took this responsibility seriously and relied heavily on veterinary technicians and veterinarians.
The military came to our school and says, you know, there's a war going on. And they showed us pictures of Vietnam. And you guys can practice this profession in the Army. And if you don't sign up in the military, we're going to draft you into the infantry. So just about all the men went up and signed up.
Scout dog training lasted 12 weeks and was one of the longest schools in the Army. A lot can happen in 12 weeks. As Bob, Roger, and others were concentrating on learning skills with their dogs that would one day save lives, a turning point in the war occurred. Tet, a term that's synonymous with the Vietnam War.
Over the years, the Tet lunar cycle, the New Year, had been recognized on both sides of the conflict as kind of a break, a rest period, a 2 or 3 day ceasefire. The Vietnamese, whether the North or South Vietnamese, believe very strongly in their festivals and their various holidays.
Tet is a celebration of the Lunar New Year and is the most important holiday on the Vietnamese calendar. In previous years, the holiday served as an informal truce in the war. But in 1968, the North Vietnamese chose the start of their new year as the occasion for a massive and well-coordinated offensive aimed at breaking the stalemate in Vietnam.
In this particular case, there were rumors that there was a lot of NVA, North Vietnamese Army, activity around major cities in South Vietnam. There was nothing concrete, but there were rumors, and there were rumors that that were being given credence in tactical decision making. Nobody was prepared for the fact that we now know from the in-country history that some 80,000 enemy combatants would be coordinated in an attack that began shortly after the Tet.
In the early morning hours of January 30th, 1968, the North Vietnamese attacked more than 100 cities and outposts throughout South Vietnam. It was an attempt to foment rebellion among the South Vietnamese population and encourage the United States to scale back its involvement in the war.
And it, of course, has become known as the Great Tet Offensive, but this was a supremely well coordinated attack. If I remember right, there were something like 120 cities that were involved in the Tet Offensive. I do believe every provincial headquarters in South Vietnam came under attack.
News coverage of this massive offensive, gained from unprecedented access to the battlefield, shocked the American public. They watched on TV pitched battles and knew we weren't winning the war, even though Johnson's administration had been claiming that the end of the war was in sight. Now it was clear that a long struggle lay ahead as 200,000 new troops were requested in order to mount an effective counteroffensive.
To say that we are closer to victory today is to believe, in the face of the evidence, the optimists who have been wrong in the past. To suggest we are on the edge of defeat is to yield to unreasonable pessimism. To say that we are mired in stalemate seems the only realistic, if unsatisfactory, conclusion.
This escalation was seen by many as an act of desperation and ultimately ensured Bob Hartsock and his fellow handlers had jobs waiting for them in Southeast Asia.
After Bennings, you went to Vietnam. No ifs, ands, and buts.
Well, just left Okinawa. It'll take about 3.5 more hours to get to Bien Hoa. That's about 15 miles north of Saigon. Roger and I got separated and put into separate groups in California, but we will all arrive over here at the same place. He's supposed to leave California around 5:30 Wednesday evening. There's 4 dog handlers and 1 vet with us. Well, not much else is new, so take care and write. Love, Bob.
We was in it was a big one, a 707 or something like that, but it was branded. And it had like 300 people on it. And you rode, I think it took us 17.5 hours or something like that. Stopped in Guam, and then we went over to
I'd like to welcome you aboard Braniff
Vietnam.
International Airways.
A friendly greeting awaits you when you enter a plane of Braniff International Airways for your trip.
I'm circling in an airplane at Bien Hoa. 2 crippled jets come in that had been flying, I guess, over North Vietnam. Then we
landed in Bien Hoa. I was assigned to the 25th Infantry Division, known as Tropic Lightning, based out of Cu Chi.
This is Cu Chi, home of the 25th Infantry, the Tropic Lightning Boys. This is a new base for us and a new base for them, too. They just fought the Kong for this landscape about 6 months ago. We shared our Christmas dinner with Company A of the 1st Battalion. The luscious gal in the now famous miniskirt is the voice of Armed Forces Radio, Chris Noel, the round-eyed Hanoi Hannah. 20 minutes after we finished dinner, these kids were out on patrol a few hundred yards away. 2 VC were killed, 1 escaped.
Hi, Rita and all. I guess you thought Charlie had got me because I haven't written. The Bob Hope Show was at Cu Chi yesterday. It's the headquarters of the 25th Division. It is hot and humid here, about 100 degrees and no wind. While we were in the bleachers this morning, there was some incoming mortars. They've had a lot of action around here lately. They have big guns and mortars all around the perimeter of the base, and when I first got here, every time one went off, I jumped. About an hour ago, some B-52 bombers dropped some bombs about 10 miles north of here. It felt like an earthquake. Me and Roger got sent to the same outfit. He's with me here at the replacement center. Tell everyone I said hi. I'll write when I get time. Don't tell Mom anything to worry her. Bob.
We was a replacement package. So we went over and we got dogs that was already there. You had to get with your dog. And after a while, your dog knew that you was a handler. Most dogs didn't switch over very well. And lots of times when a dog handler would get hit and the dog didn't, they had to kill the dog to get.
We had a team out today, a dog and a handler, and they walked so fast that the dog got sick and finally took a fit. They called in a dust-off medical chopper.
When you get a medevac call, the first thing you did was tighten up. Everybody sat up in their seat, said, okay, this is where the action starts. We got there, we saw the LZ, they threw smoke so that we could get a reading on the actual place they wanted us to land. And immediately after we landed, a dog was being carried by its handler to the aircraft
He boarded the aircraft, asked us to get it right to go to brigade and get to the veterinary clinic.
And they brought him in. We put water on him and we gave him artificial respiration, but the dog died. He'd been over here for a year and a half. And all evening, the guys were sad, as if one of the guys had gotten shot.
When your dog went down, it was a great personal loss, and very often it would mean that the dog handler would have to be rotated back to Cu-Chi, to the in-country operational training center for all the scout dog platoons and scout dogs in country, and pick up a new dog, and that was very difficult.
While the loss of a dog was felt by the handler, the bond went both ways, and the dogs experienced grief too, often profound, and at times even death couldn't break it.
Had a great bond. That's why you couldn't get near some dogs except the handler could.
It's such an individual thing, and they have such a camaraderie that dogs are never right after they lose their master.
We unfortunately lost a handler early on, and we did not lose the dog physically, but we totally lost the dog from the standpoint of being able to perform scout dog duties. He would not work any longer. He watched his handler die.
It was this bond that made the scout dog team so effective. It epitomized how they worked together.
One of the things when you're in a combat theater that you learn is that you have to depend on each other. And the teamwork that was built in Vietnam, you depended on your buddies, and they depended on you.
Dog handlers are part of a unique fraternity. It was a job unlike any other in the military. The teamwork between the dog and the handler was crucial for their survival. But they also relied on friendships with other handlers. The solitary life of the field took its toll, and it was a camaraderie with fellow handlers that helped them to survive.
Bob Hartsock and another sergeant, Roger Forbes, hung out together a lot. They were both very good and effective sergeants.
I first met Bob when I was assigned to the 44th Scout Dog Platoon in early July of 1968. Now, I was born and raised in Alabama, so you would think that I would have been a country music aficionado at the time, but I was not. I was a 60s rock and roll guy. But Roger and Bob introduced me to country music, specifically Charlie Pride and a few other singers, and we listened to country music, and we drank beer, and we played double-deck pinochle. Yeah, and he and Roger generally were a team, not to be trifled with.
Today, another guy's dog got loose and went over to Duke. They were okay until he went up to get his dog. Duke wanted to play, and the other dog got jealous. They got into it, but Duke got the best of him. He had a couple cuts, but nothing serious. I told everybody they better keep their dogs away because he was a killer.
First guy I see is Sergeant Hartsock. So he sees me, walks up, "Captain, how are you? I'm Sergeant Hartsock." I says, "Sergeant," I says, "I'm a veterinarian first. I just happen to be a captain. From here on out, I want everybody calling me Doc and don't salute me." So he's looking at me and saying, "Captain, what's that in your mouth?" I says, "That's Red Man tobacco. I chew tobacco." He said, "Oh my God, I haven't had that in ages. I love it." I reached in my pocket and I had a pack and I gave it to him. My sister lived in Ohio and she used to send me a little bit. And it was produced in Toledo. I think two little old ladies owned it. So I said, "My sister, give me the address." I sent a letter back then. They sent us a gross 144 packages at no charge. "God bless you, come home safely." So every time I'd go to base camp, I would give him tobacco. He was the nicest guy. We'd sit down and shoot the breeze, have a beer.
Looking forward to enjoying simple pleasures from home made it bearable to go back out in the field.
During my time there, they would say, "Okay, B Company, 2nd 506 needs a scout dog." And so they would load 2 handlers and 2 dogs on a deuce-and-a-half truck and take us over to the helipad. We would get on the chopper, and they would take us out to the field. And Normally, we might be relieving another set of scout dog teams because you'd only usually work for 5 days and the dog was disinterested, and so you would just rotate fresh teams in.
It'd take you out 7 days with a different outfit, chopper you out, and then bring you back. Not for you, for the dog, because it would take, Rocket weighed like 18 pounds, 118, 115 pounds. He's a big golden shepherd. And in 7 days, water and stuff like that, he'd weigh like 90 pounds. He'd lose like 20 pounds almost. And it'd take him 3 weeks to get built back up. Because once a dog is very smart and stuff like that, but once he gets tired, he's just like anybody else. He lets things slip. And when he lets things slip, and you walk into night ambushes and just all kinds of stuff. So it was to let the dogs rest, not you.
It was a dog. I loved him and I trusted him, but he could be having a bad day. So I kind of kept one eye on him and one eye on the trail for myself. Because if he missed something and I caught it, that would be great. But if we both missed it, it could be fun.
When the scout dog team would be deployed to the field, the handler was the one responsible for carrying everything for both of them. And this would be upwards of 90 pounds of equipment. Besides the food for the handler, he carried the food and water for the dog as well, along with his rifle and ammunition.
I've been out in the field and I'm going out again for 3 days. I come in yesterday afternoon. Duke works good in the field. I'm really satisfied with him. We didn't have much action. After today, everyone will be in the field or gone somewhere.
We carried what we call an Alice pack. And I carried so much dog food, a couple cans of dog food. And if they had a dog, they had to resupply the dog. But if you had a hot meal, the dog got the same thing that I did, a hot meal.
One time on the trail, we're sitting there taking a break and going to eat our sea rations, and that dog's looking up at me with those big brown eyes. And I got the wieners and beans can. And I said, okay, buddy, you take care of me, I'll take care of you. He got the wieners, I got the beans.
Teamwork in combat goes far beyond simply caring for the dog and the dog obeying the handler. The dog had to remain alert and attentive, and the handler had to understand what the dog was trying to communicate.
The dog could make the alert, but it was up to the handler to interpret his dog and what that dog was telling him. Where was the enemy? Was it a booby trap, a mine, a tripwire?
And depending on whether he caught an airborne scent or saw something or heard something, it was my job to read his body language and say, wait a second, rebel sees something.
You had to learn your dog and watch your wind. Like at nighttime, sit on top of a hill, and if you had something on the left side of you, just sitting there, the dog would just kind of go, just look, and then he'd come back. And then 30 seconds later, he'd come back and look.
The dog sitting down, going like this, so they looked at trees, they picked off a sniper at one of the palm trees.
That's why they kept us on night ambush, because they would give you an early silent warning. And you'd say, boys, here they come, because every other guy would be sleeping and have your claymores and everything. And then when it all broke loose, my job wasn't to fight. My job was to get my dog down.
The very first time I was in the field, we're walking, and I'm not even the lead dog on this one. I'm that second dog team. Way back in the thing, all of a sudden my dog goes, whoop. I say, wait, whoa, it was a bunker.
There's no doubt that the men that the scout dog team was protecting were incredibly appreciative for the most part of the role that they played. And I think sometimes because everybody, for the most part, loved the dogs, which were primarily German Shepherds, there would be an attempt to be friendly with them or to try to befriend the handler and his dog. But we discouraged that, and very often the team themselves would try to remain isolated so as to not reduce the effectiveness of the dog.
Unfortunately, because they walked point, some commanders didn't use them properly and used them nothing more than someone that nobody else knew. So if they got hit, the platoon didn't take it quite as badly as they would if one of their own did.
Our luck hasn't been very good. In the last 16 days, we've had 2 killed, 3 wounded and sent to Japan, and 2 wounded and on light duty here. It really lowers everyone's morale. It's changed everyone in the platoon, I think. I know things don't seem the same to me. We got a new CO. He seems like he's okay. Maybe he'll stick up for us and get rid of some of our you-know-what details.
When I got there, there had been some casualties. There was some shuffling around of platoon commanders for the Scout Dog program in Vietnam, and I ended up being sent to the 44th IPSD at Dao Tieng. I would go into the field when I received complaints from my handlers about misuse or misconceptions at the platoon or company level of how to utilize the Scout Dog teams. It was an ongoing problem all over in country, but what would happen in the field occasionally would be that a unit commander sensing that this team could be utilized effectively, sometimes at the expense of his own men, would try to order them into a situation where they were searching out tunnels, or whether where they were being asked to provide some kind of sentry dog duty, and that's not what they were there for.
And the dog team itself was really the unit. I was with a whole platoon of strangers. I didn't know any of them. The only thing I knew was me and Rebel together.
We've been having a lot of commitments lately. Another infantry unit moved in the day before yesterday and called for 5 dog teams, plus the 5 we already had out, so here I am on guard again.
While handlers and dogs walked alone in front of the units they served, one element of support was never a concern: medical care. Dogs were a priority, and helicopters provided house calls to the field.
I had a dog that was injured in the field, actually suffering from heat exhaustion more than anything else. I think some lesions on his legs, and they choppered me out. And I just took care of what I needed to take care of, and they choppered me back in.
If you got a firefight and you had GIs there wounded, you had a dog wounded, and you had an Arvin wounded, and you had a Gook wounded. Okay, a dust-off would come in, GIs would go, dog would go, and then people.
For a while we didn't have much to do, but now things are pretty well stirred up. 1 battalion moved out and we're short on help now. We're having to pull perimeter guard on 2 bunkers. It's not too bad. We have 3 men for all night and only pull 3 hours each. We had a mortar attack yesterday. We got about 40 or 50 rounds in altogether. About 20 of them hit in our area. One hit outside the orderly room and showered it with shrapnel. We got a direct hit on our hooch. It really tore things up. I took some pictures of it. 1 round hit the kennels, but there wasn't any dogs in it. They were tied outside to the trees. 9 of them got shrapnel wounds.
I'm at Dao Tieng base camp. I get a call that a bunch of them been wounded. So I called our colonel. I said, you got to get these dogs transported down to my base camp. So they did. It only took a few hours, and thank God none of the wounds were fatal at all. But I had very few equipment. So I get on the phone to division, say, you got to send some of your doctors. It's like a mass unit. They sent some doctors out. And compared to human medicine where they have gas inhalation anesthesia, I had to strap pentobarbital and a syringe to the veins and keep titrating it to keep them down. We prepped the wounds and they would do the surgery. They brought their own surgical pack, but MASH doctors actually working on wounded war dogs. All the dogs recovered. They ended up back at their main base camp.
Duke got a small piece behind his ear, and we took him to Cu Chi to the division vet, and they sewed him up.
Richard Nixon's election in November of 1968 marked another turning point in the Vietnam War.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I didn't realize so many of you would stay up so late.
Plus, the approaching holidays provided some needed rest and relief for the men and dogs of the 44th.
We've been off for 5 days. Our CO got all the dogs put on medical hold over Christmas. We had chicken, hamburgers, and weenies enough for 20 people for 3 days. We also had some macaroni salad and 24 quarts of eggnog. For 3 days, the beer and whiskey was free from our club, so we had a pretty good time. I'd have liked to have been home, though.
Every base camp during the Christmas season, we had a Christmas party. Food, beer, we'd all talk, laugh, play music, and the music of the 60s. And it was a common bond friendship.
Nixon's inauguration was the calm before the storm.
Each moment in history is a fleeting time, precious and unique. But some stand out as moments of beginning, in which courses are set that shape decades or centuries. This can be such a moment.
I'm going to have another picture made with me and Duke both on payday. There isn't much new going on over here. It's still hot and dry. I really like it now. I'm up for Staff Sergeant next month, which will be really good. I won't have to do anything then. It's almost like that now.
As the lull in action in the field continued, complacency began to be the new enemy. It was easy to overlook the threat when you weren't searching for the enemy. What most American commanders did not realize, or perhaps they didn't look for it, was this was part of a larger strategy that would be known as Tet 69, another offensive by the North Vietnamese that would be every bit as large as last year's, but far more deceptive in its strategy.
Dal Chang is in a position here next to the Saigon River. It comprises 5 hamlets. We have here a population of about 10,000 people, which is approximately 2/3 of the total population here in the Freetown district. Because of our position next to the village, we feel that we can get in here and do civic action work with the people and thereby reach most of the people in the district.
At the heart of what made the North Vietnamese unpredictable was that most analysts missed one simple fact about this war. This was a civil war. So when American forces entered an area with civic action programs intended to help, we wound up dividing the people between North and South ideologies as we saw them, and for the most part, ignored the real issues affecting a common population. Dividing people resulted in giving them a common enemy: U.S. troops.
I just got back from R&R and thought I'd write a few lines. How's everything over there? Okay, I hope. Lots of mountains.
We had a fairly large civilian village outside the gates of Dao Tiang. This whole area was part of the old Michelin rubber tree plantation holdings, and in fact Dao Tiang, the base camp, was part of where the Michelin headquarters had been. Most of these campsites, they would come in and out of the gate. They would be performing some limited services.
Folks,
While continuing their combat operations, the 25th Infantry Division began putting more emphasis upon psychological warfare and pacification programs.
The Army controlled the area and the villages, and the interactions with the civilians during the day and the night belonged to Charlie and the NVA.
Willing cooperation and the enthusiasm shown by the people here in Liaocheng is a good indication that these people feel secure from BC in the area here, that they want to see their village progress, we have come a long way in the time that the brigade has been here and has assisted these people. And I think that in time to come, we're going to find these people contributing more and also feeling more secure.
Of course, what we came to find out afterwards is that the NVA and the Viet Cong were very successful at employing them in terms of developing intelligence in what the layout of a camp was, where various assets were within that camp, what the vulnerabilities were, the force strength, that kind of thing. What we also didn't know is, like Cu Chi, they had been tunneling for years from the surrounding countryside to the point where there were a number of tunnels that ran underneath our security, our wire, our watchtowers, and so forth.
The North Vietnamese, in conjunction with the citizens of Liaocheng, did a masterful job of deception. It wasn't until they were ready to launch their attack that we had any indication something was amiss. And even then, we had no idea of the scale of the attack that was to come.
Hi, Mom and Dad. I guess you thought I'd forgot about you because I haven't written, but I've been busy lately. For a while we didn't have much to do, but now things are pretty well stirred up. I've got Sergeant of the Guard again tonight, so I better go check them. Take care and write, and I'll write more later.
In the dark and early hours of Sunday, February 23, 1969, Liaocheng erupted. The base was under an unexpected and brutal assault by two North Vietnamese Army divisions, and Bob Hartsock, along with his platoon commander, Larry Hughes, was in the middle of it.
What started out as an ordinary evening suddenly erupted. There was a lot of sporadic gunfire that started. There were some attempts as a diversionary tactic to breach the outside wire and get through the minefield.
I was on the second bunker over from the main gate, the village of Liaocheng, which was right out in front of the bunker where I was.
There were a few reports actually from one of the bunkers that we were guarding early in the evening of some unusual activity in the village.
I had seen flashlights in the village and had reported that via radio.
It was about 11 o'clock at night. Been a lot of movement. Things been kind of hairy that night.
Bob Hartsock was the Sergeant of the Guard. He and Roger Forbes had driven down to the perimeter, to the bunkers.
We jumped in the Jeep and went down. We went the back way, around the back side of the woods.
Bob obviously performing his duty as Sergeant of the Guard that night.
So we got to the second bunker. By the time we got there, all hell broke loose.
Roger and Bob were on top of the bunker with me when a rocket came in behind us and hit a building that housed civilians. It was inside the base camp. We turned around when that rocket exploded and we could see the NVA running down the road that led up to that bunker. The enemy had broken into the base camp. Some people would call it one thing, I call it we were overrun. Because just that quickly, there were enemy inside the wire.
The nearly 20,000 enemy soldiers was the largest force that had been seen in the area for nearly 5 years. and it was raging unstoppably through the base, spearheaded on multiple fronts by fast, well-coordinated squads of elite NBA soldiers.
Bob said, stay here and take over. He was going to go back to Dog Platoon and get some reinforcing.
He came flying back to our platoon area, and we quickly organized a perimeter security for the platoon area because we knew just from the sound of the attack that the scout dogs would be a very inviting and vital target. Everybody who was not on the perimeter was placed around the scout dog platoon area, and everybody else was engaged in trying to figure out what the heck was going on.
From my standpoint, the battle continued to rage. I was taking almost no small arms fire from in front of the bunker that I was on. Most of the small arms fire that we were taking came from behind us. There were definitely snipers actually got into the building that was behind our bunker, 60, 70 yards behind our bunker. And we were taking fire from there throughout the night.
We then threw together as much ammunition and supplies as we could in our unit Jeep and headed back to the bunker lines.
And he come back, and Lieutenant Hughes and him left to go get more people.
And so we jumped in a Jeep and we started toward our sector.
Well, they cut through the middle of the main whatchamacallit.
And lo and behold, through one of these tunnels, a sapper squad had emerged, and they were fairly easy to detect as being sapper squads because usually one or more of the guys would be laden with these bags strapped around them, or they'd be carrying them. And they looked like these messenger bags that you see bike messengers carrying, except that they were full of explosives and they had a short fuse, and they would literally light the fuse and then fling the handle in the direction that they wanted the detonation to take place. So we saw this sapper squad, and we knew pretty much immediately what it was, and from the direction that they were heading, we were positive that they were heading for our Tactical Operations Center, which also was where the prisoner compound was located.
If the sapper squad could get to the prisoner compound a few hundred yards away, that meant there would be hundreds more enemy combatants suddenly fighting the Americans from within their own base. The fall of the Tactical Operations Center into enemy hands would guarantee the loss of the base to the North Vietnamese. And with the base completely surrounded, there'd be no escape for the American soldiers or the dogs. Their choice of action was clear. They had to stop them.
We took the best defensive cover position we could, which was in a drainage ditch. So we started suppressing fire to try to eliminate them, or at least detain them until we could get some help ourselves.
Battle-hardened by over 14 years of war in Southeast Asia, the North Vietnamese could not have worried about an easygoing country boy from the Allegheny Mountains of western Maryland and southern Pennsylvania.
They did not initially see us. They halted probably a good 75 feet away from us, and they sent out a flank person who had a weapon and a satchel charge with him. He was within 20, 25 feet of our location. He was wounded, but it was clear that the satchel charge was going to detonate.
40 pounds of C4 goes off in a ditch and you're 20 yards from it, you won't hardly find your teeth.
Completely cut off and isolated by an overwhelming enemy force, unable to warn his fellow handlers, unable to even get his canine partner Duke, Bob Hartsock only had one thing left with which to fight an enemy of this magnitude: his life.
without any regard for his own personal situation, Bob got up
and threw himself on the satchel charge, absorbing the blast. He was gravely wounded.
At that point, the rest of the NVA squad was alerted to the situation and our presence.
In spite of his wounds, Sergeant Hartsock crawled about 5 meters to a ditch and provided heavy suppressive fire, completely pinning down the enemy.
At that point, I was able to get away toward the Tactical Operations Center and alert them as to what was going on. And they were able to get reinforcements and secure the area.
Sergeant Hartsock made sure Lieutenant Hughes was able to get away, ultimately thwarting the North Vietnamese attack on Giao Trang.
It was one of those nights where the muscle memory of your training and your instinctual abilities take over.
John Stuart Mill said, "War is an ugly thing, but not the ugliest of things. A man who has nothing which he cares about more than his personal safety is a miserable creature and has no chance of being free unless made and kept so by the exertions of better men than himself."
If you're talking about character and you're talking about somebody who was always very serious about his duties and his comportment and his demeanor, that was Sergeant Hartsock, and certainly, as is self-evident, what he did was well above and beyond the call of duty and was exceptional.
Staff Sergeant Hartsock's tremendous sacrifice to save others, while tragic, didn't surprise the people who knew him best. They had seen this trait in Bob before. Still, his friends at Giao Trang grieved his loss.
Steadfast, unassuming young man who was very proud of family and his sense of place.
Bravest man I ever met.
He'd give his shirt off his back. He's just a great guy. That's a
good friend. A great friend. I always thought Bob would be the one that would make it back.
But grief wasn't reserved for just his human friends. His canine partner, Duke, grieved as well. His handler had always cared for him, no matter what. When there was action, they went out to face it, and they always came back, together. Except this night. They had been separated, and Duke couldn't get to his handler. Now, his closest friend was gone, forever, and he knew it.
I've never been as afraid in my life as I was that night. I say that quite sincerely. I was very afraid. And I thought to myself, the sun will come up and they'll go away. And then again, the sun came up, and damn it, they didn't go away.
Though physically fit and uninjured, their bond had been tragically and without warning broken. Despite Lamar Smith's best efforts caring for Duke, he refused to eat or even drink. He quietly passed away a short time later, having succumbed to a self-imposed starvation. Perhaps it was his way of following his handler on one last mission.
He was a good guy.
Seated, please. Mr. Secretary, General Westmoreland, all of our distinguished guests on this occasion.
This ceremony today is one that means a great deal to this White House, which has seen, as you can imagine, in its long history, some very special occasions. This House has honored many men and many women. I have often thought, as I look back on the period that I have participated in such occasions, and I did so for 8 years as vice president and now for 1.5 years as president, that no men deserve honor more than those we honor today. When we think of what these young men did, how much they gave, we realize that no king or emperor or prime minister or president could deserve the honor of this House, the first House in America, than they do. Because of what they did, because they gave their lives, other men are alive today.
The citations will be read by the Secretary of Army, and they will tell us better than any words I could utter what these men have done beyond the call of duty. I would like to add just a personal word, a word that I think all of the American people would join me in. We really cannot honor these men, but they have honored America. They have added to the honor of the nation by what they have done. They share several things in common. They are men who risk their lives for their fellow men. They are men who face death, and instead of losing their courage, they gave courage to the men around them.
We will proceed now with the ceremony, and after the ceremony is concluded, Mrs. Nixon would like to invite all of the members of the family and those senators and congressmen who can work it into their schedules to a reception in the state dining room, so that you can have the opportunity not only to see the room, but enjoy some of the better pastries that are prepared by the White House chef. Secretary of the Army will read the first citation.
President of the United States of America, authorized by Act of Congress March 3, 1863, has posthumously awarded in the name of the Congress the Medal of Honor to the following individuals for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action at the cost of their lives above and beyond the call of duty. From the United States Army, Staff Sergeant Robert W. Hartsock, while serving as section leader with the 44th Infantry Platoon, 3rd Brigade, 25th Infantry Division in Hua Nha Province, Republic of Vietnam on February 23, 1969.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that completes the ceremony, and I would only add this word. We express on behalf of this nation our appreciation for the men who gave their lives. We also express appreciation to the parents who helped to give these men their heritage, and to the wives and members of the family who helped them along the way. Thank you very much.